A prominent Democratic donor arrested and charged with running a drug den after 3 men reportedly overdosed in his Hollywood home. The most recent victim survived, but 2 other men have died in Ed Buck's home in the last 2 years. Fox News Chief breaking news correspondent Trace Gallagher in our West Coast newsroom with the whole story. Trace.
And Laura, prosecutors call Ed Buck a violent sexual predator who preys on men struggling with addiction and homelessness, luring them into his home with the promise of drugs, money, and shelter, and adding that the full scope of his malicious behavior is still unknown. In this latest case, Buck is accused of injecting a 37-year-old man with, quote, dangerously large doses of methamphetamine on September 11th, then refusing to help when the man believed he was overdosing. He survived, but others have not been as lucky. In the past few years, 2 other men have been found dead in Buck's West Hollywood apartment. 26-year-old Jamel Moore, 55-year-old Timothy Dean, both overdosed on methamphetamine. At the time, there wasn't enough evidence to charge Buck, even though Jamel Moore wrote in his journal at the time, quote, I've become addicted to drugs, and the worst one at that. Ed Buck is the one to thank. He gave me my first injection of crystal meth. It was very painful, but after all the troubles, I became addicted. And an attorney for Moore's family says it's about time Buck faces consequences. Watch.
It's unfortunate that it's taken a 3rd overdose for the LA Sheriff's Department to finally act. We believe that that 3rd overdose could have been avoided. We believe that the death of Timothy Dean could have also been avoided had they taken the death of Jamel Moore seriously.
And remember, Ed Buck is a longtime Democratic donor, contributing hundreds of thousands of dollars to candidates including Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, and John Kerry. But after news broke of Moore and Dean's deaths at his home, many, like the chairman of the House Intel Committee, Adam Schiff, Congressman Ted Lieu, Senator Kyrsten Sinema, and Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti, either gave the money back or donated it to nonprofit organizations. Laura.
Trace, thanks so much. And joining me now is Jasmine Kanick, spokeswoman for the family of Jamel Moore, who was one of the men who died in Buck's house, and Horace Cooper, co-chair of Project 21. Jasmine, could this ultimately lead to justice for the Moore family? I mean, there was a drug den. There was apparently a sex den. It was known to pretty much everybody what was going on there, and yet it took this to bring this finally charges to this man.
Yeah, so I've been covering this and working on this for the past 2 years and 53 days. And so this is the biggest movement we've seen from law enforcement and the prosecutors. So yeah, we do think it can eventually lead to justice for the Moore and the Dean families. That's what we're hoping for. We're hoping that the charges are going to be amended, and at some point we're going to see manslaughter, murder, negligent homicide, something more serious that will put Ed Buck away in prison for a substantial amount of time.
Well, reportedly, Horace, he lured these young men, most of them younger men, to his home. He's extremely affluent. He's a very prominent LGBT activist and activist causes. He would lure them in and then get them addicted, as you saw in that handwritten note by Mr. Moore. This is a tragic case. When you look back on the facts, and Jasmine alluded to this, this was known to officials for some time. Why would it take so long? Simple case of lack of evidence?
It's not a simple case of lack of evidence. What we see is what looks like the Harvey Weinstein model or the Epstein model, where prominent, affluent, influential Democrats in blue cities are literally getting away with murder. We don't need 3 of these instances. 1 of these, you just change the scenario just slightly and put the name of any publicly known Republican and have this kind of incident happen once. And I assure you, they don't stop until they have the guy in handcuffs.
Yeah, well, it's enough, Jasmine, to return donations. I mean, he gave to very prominent Democrats down the line and was a very well-known person in the community, yet he still managed to go out and about, have fundraisers, be involved in activist causes, even after these initial stories popped out. So he was still out and about. It wasn't like he retreated into a life of seclusion. You were covering it.
Yes, so first of all, he acted with impunity. He didn't care. Secondly, I think this is less about him being a Democrat, although that is an issue, and more about the race of the victims. And thirdly, look, at the end of the day, the life expectancy of black gay men in LA County has substantially increased with him being arrested, and that is very important because he preyed on black gay men. Okay, I know he's a Democrat. I get that, but that's very important.
And gay.
Black,
but I want to push back on your statement. I want to push back on your statement. In the bluest city in America, they don't care about other black men who are being exploited. If they don't care there isn't any hope anywhere. Here's the much more likely story, that this man's influence allowed him
a lot of cover.
to act with impunity.
If he didn't have money,
I agree with that. I agree with all of that. But I'm not going to sit up here.
Yeah.
I agree with that, but again, I'm not going to sit here and ignore the fact that the victims were black. And so when you talk about Harvey Weinstein, you talk about Jeffrey Epstein, the USC gynecologist, the difference is those victims were white. And had 2 white gay men died in Ed Buck's apartment, we would not be waiting 2 years for justice.
We waited way too long for Jeffrey Epstein, way too long for Harvey Weinstein.
Decades.
It's not true. It is not true to say that this issue turns on race. What this issue is turning on,
Money.
what
That's
we need
my
to watch,
truth.
what we need to watch is, are we allowing people right in our midst to use their wealth and influence to literally get away with murder?
Jasmine.
Yeah, well, that's my truth. And I do believe that had the victims been another race, I think justice would have been a little bit more swiftly than what we're seeing with these victims.
Yeah, Jasmine, do you know how Jamel met Mr. Buck?
I don't know how Jamel met Mr. Buck, but what I can tell you is I was the one that first published his journal. And, his journal tells his story. I can also tell you that within 24 hours of Ed Buck flying Jamel into Los Angeles from Houston, he was already dead. He
oh my gosh.
paid for Jamel's flight back to LA, lured him over to his apartment. He wasn't even here 24 hours before he was dead.
That it is just horrific. Jasmine, thank you for being here and telling the story. I really appreciate it. Horace, thank you so much for being here as well. It's a heartbreak all around.